Good morning everyone. Today we discuss transmission of impulses. Later we discuss structure of brain. Transmission of impulses. Transmission of nerve impulse. Transmission of nerve impulse between two neurons. It is also known as synaptic transmission. Synaptic transmission. It is also known as synaptic transmission. Transmission of information from one neuron to another neuron is a synaptic transmission. Empty place present between axon terminals of one neuron, dendrites of another neuron known as synapse. The membrane cover the axon terminal known as presynaptic membrane. The membrane cover the dendrites and cyton known as postsynaptic membrane. Presynaptic membrane, synapse and postsynaptic membrane known as synaptic cleft. Presynaptic membrane. Synapse. Postsynaptic membrane. Known as synaptic cleft. You all know nerve impulse, transmission of nerve impulse. between two neurons known as synaptic transmission. The empty place present between axon terminals of one neuron, dendrites of another neuron known as synapse. You already know the posterior part of axon terminal contain knob-like structure, synaptic knob. Synaptic knobs contain synaptic vesicles. Synaptic vesicles contain neurotransmitters. Common neurotransmitter acetylcholine, that is common. Other neurotransmitters dopamine, serotonin, glycine, gamma aminobutyric acid, norepinephrine, epinephrine. These are the neurotransmitters. Along with the neurotransmitter only, information travel from one neuron to another neuron. That means information always travel from presynaptic membrane to postsynaptic. Means information always travel from axon terminals of one neuron to dendrites of another neuron in most of the synapses. In human being, these synapses, not only human, in organism these synapses are more. They are known as chemical synapses. Neurotransmitter is a chemical, but rarely we also have electrical synapses. Electrical synapses. In electrical synapses, the synapse is less or sometimes no synapse. So now the presynaptic neuron information travel to post from the presynaptic neuron information travel to postsynaptic neuron. What is presynaptic neuron? The neuron present in front of the synapse known as presynaptic neuron. The neuron present behind the synapse, postsynaptic neuron. In organisms, most of the synaptic transmissions are chemical. Neurotransmitter is required. Only few synapses are electrical synapses. In electrical synapses, the synapse is negligible. Sometimes no synapse. The dendrite directly contact with presynaptic membrane. And in the electrical synapses, information travel in both the direction. Mean from presynaptic neuron, information travel to post. From postsynaptic neuron, information travel to pre. Neurotransmitters not required. So, in organisms, two types of synapses, chemical synapses and electrical synapses. Most of the synapses in our body, not only human, in all organisms, chemical synapses, only few are electrical synapses. In electrical synapses, synapse is negligible, sometimes no synapse. What is synapse? Empty place or structural gap or functional bridge between presynaptic neuron and postsynaptic neuron is known as synapse. In electrical synapses, synapse is negligible or no synapse and information travel in both the direction. From presynaptic neuron, information travel to post. From postsynaptic neuron, information travel to presynaptic neuron. Postsynaptic neuron. Postsynaptic neuron. Transmission of nerve impulse between the neurons known as synaptic transmission. What is synapse? Empty place present between two neurons, synapse. What is a synaptic cleft? The membrane, the plasma membrane of axon terminals. So it is end of the axon terminal. Axon terminal, end of the axon terminal contains synaptic knob. You may consider synaptic knob also axon terminal. The plasma membrane of axon terminal is known as presynaptic membrane. The plasma membrane of dendrite and cyton is known as postsynaptic membrane. The neuron present in front of the synapse, presynaptic neuron. The neuron present behind the synapse, postsynaptic neuron. So what is synaptic cleft? Presynaptic membrane, synapse and postsynaptic membrane together known as synaptic cleft. Synapses are of two types, chemical synapses and electrical synapses. In organism, most of the synapses are chemical. Neurotransmitter required. Along with the neurotransmitter only, information travel from one neuron to another neuron. Electrical synapses. Synapses are negligible or no synapses. Directly, the dendrites of postsynaptic membrane connected to axon terminal. In electrical synapses, information travel in both the direction. Presynaptic neuron transfer the information to post. Postsynaptic neuron transfer the information to pre. In case of chemical synapse, information always transmitted from presynaptic neuron to postsynaptic neuron only. Reason, the dendrites, neither dendrites nor cyton release a neurotransmitter. Along with the neurotransmitter only, information travel. That's why in chemical synapses, information always transmitted from presynaptic neuron to postsynaptic neuron. When the axon terminal is depolarized means inner surface is electrically positive. At the time, synaptic vesicles move to the periphery. They burst and release the neurotransmitters. Now the membrane of ruptured synaptic vesicles become the part of presynaptic membrane. Along with the neurotransmitter, the information reach the ligand-gated channel. Ligand-gated channels present on the presynaptic membrane of dendrite and cyton. They allow the movement of ions. Sodium and chloride. If the neurotransmitter act as a excitatory neurotransmitter, the ligand gates allow sodium ions. If the neurotransmitter act as a inhibitory neurotransmitter, the ligand gates allowed chloride ions. Summation means addition of sodium and chloride take place in the axon hillock. What is axon hillock? The part of the cyton from which axon arise, known as axon hillock. For example, in one case, 1000 sodium ions, 750 chloride ions. That means positive charge is more. Now the postsynaptic neuron is depolarized and transfer the information to another neuron. If chloride ions are more, hyperpolarized, means more negative, inner surface minus 70, more than minus 70. If the postsynaptic neuron is hyperpolarized, it never transfer the information. For example, these are the two neurons present in the snake. Frog is present in front of the snake. At the time, presynaptic neuron transfer the information to postsynaptic neuron. So, even though frog is present in the snake only, the snake is waiting to capture. But the presynaptic neuron may continuously try to transfer the same information. At the time, inhibitory neurotransmitters are released. Glycine and gamma aminobutyric acid act as a inhibitory neurotransmitter. At the time, already transfer the information. So, to prevent the already transmitting information repeatedly to the postsynaptic neuron, glycine and gamma aminobutyric acid are released. So, as a result, the postsynaptic neuron is hyperpolarized. In this manner, conserve the energy. Transmission of nerve impulse is an active process. After utilization of energy only, the neuron transfer the information. So, what is the use of inhibitory neurotransmitters? If the neurotransmitter act as a inhibitory neurotransmitter, ligand gate allow chloride ions. Same neurotransmitter at one receptor may act as excitatory, another receptor may act as inhibitory. Finally, summation of ions take place in the axon hillock. Axon hillock. What is axon hillock? The part of the cyton in which addition of ions take place. So finally, for example, 1000 sodium ions, 750 chloride ions. At the time postsynaptic neuron is depolarized and transfer the information. For example, in one case, 1200 chloride ions, 750 sodium ions. So negative charged ions are more. At the time postsynaptic neuron is hyperpolarized. That's why sodium is known as excitatory potentials and chloride ions are known as inhibitory potential. Excitatory potential and inhibitory potential. Excitatory potential, inhibitory potential. If excitatory potentials are exceed, postsynaptic neuron is depolarized and transfer the information to successive neurons. If the postsynaptic neuron inhibitory potentials are more, the postsynaptic neuron is hyperpolarized, more negative, fail to transfer the information. This is about synaptic transmission or transmission of nerve impulse between the neurons. Now, once again, transmission of nerve impulse. So, transmission of nerve impulse from one neuron to another neuron is known as synaptic transmission. Empty place present between the two neurons known as synapse. The neuron present in front of the synapse, presynaptic neuron. The neuron present behind the synapse, postsynaptic neuron. The plasma membrane of axon terminal known as presynaptic membrane. Plasma membrane of dendrites and cyton known as postsynaptic membrane. Presynaptic membrane, synapse and postsynaptic membrane together known as synaptic cleft. Together known as synaptic cleft. Synapses are of two types, chemical synapses and electrical synapses. In animals, chemical synapses are more. Chemical synapses means a neurotransmitter is required. Along with the neurotransmitter only, information travel from one neuron to another neuron. In electrical synapses, synapse is negligible, sometimes no synapse. No need of chemical transmitter. So that's why the information from presynaptic to post, similarly the information from post synaptic neuron also travel to pre. So electrical synapses rapidly transfer the information, but in animals most of the synapses are chemical synapses. When the axon terminal is depolarized, at the time calcium voltage gate channel open, calcium enter into the synaptic nerves. When the calcium ion concentration is high, the synaptic vesicles move to peripheral part, they burst and release the neurotransmitters. Along with the neurotransmitters, the information reach the ligand gates, ionic channels present on the postsynaptic membrane known as ligand gates. If the neurotransmitter act as a excitatory, the ligand gates allow sodium ions. Along with the sodium ions, information enter. If the neurotransmitter act as a inhibitory, it allow the chloride ions. Summation take place in the axon hillock. What is axon hillock? What is axon hillock? The part of the cyton from which axon arise, known as axon hillock. If sodium ions are more, postsynaptic neuron is depolarized, transfer the information. If the Chloride ions are more. The postsynaptic membrane is hyperpolarized, fail to transfer the information. So in this manner, information travel from one neuron to another. Sodium ions are known as the excitatory postsynaptic potentials, EPSP. Excitatory postsynaptic potentials. And chloride ions are known as inhibitory postsynaptic potential, IPSP. If excitatory postsynaptic potentials exceed inhibitory postsynaptic potential, the postsynaptic neuron pass the information to successive neuron. If the inhibitory postsynaptic potentials exceed excitatory postsynaptic potential, the postsynaptic neuron is hyperpolarized and fail to transfer the information. Normal neurotransmitter in animals is acetylcholine. Other neurotransmitters, dopamine, epinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, gamma aminobutyric acid and glycine always act as inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. Always act as inhibitory neurotransmitters. Two neurotransmitters always act as inhibitory neurotransmitter. One is gamma aminobutyric acid, second one is glycine, begin with G. The remaining neurotransmitters, depending upon the receptor, they act as either excitatory neurotransmitter or inhibitory neurotransmitter. Now we discuss the structure of brain. central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, together known as central nervous system. The central nervous system protected by fibrous membranes, outer dura mater, middle thin arachnoid, inner pia mater. So dura mater form the inner lining of cranium, brain box. Brain is present in the cranium or brain box. The inner layer form a layer around the brain. So three meninges present only in mammals. The central nervous system protected by three meninges only mammals. In amphibia, reptile, aves, outer meninge dura mater, inner meninge pia mater. In fishes, meninx primitiva. But in mammals only three meninges protect the central nervous system. Outer dura mater, middle arachnoid, inner pia mater. The empty place present between arachnoid and pia mater known as subarachnoid space. Subarachnoid space filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The cerebrospinal fluid protect the brain from external shocks. Brain is the central information processing command system, central command system. Brain contain 100 billion neurons, 100 billion neurons. So brain control the voluntary actions, involuntary actions, lungs, kidney, heart, involuntary actions, balance of the body, centers of hunger, thirst, pain, emotional, sexual behavior, regulate, some centers regulate the body temperature, emotional feelings. So brain is divisible into three parts: forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. Divisible into three parts: forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Forebrain, three parts: cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus. So it is the cerebrum means it is one cerebral hemisphere, it is another cerebral hemisphere. Two cerebral hemispheres together known as cerebrum. 2/3 of the brain is cerebrum. Next one, thalamus. So it is the thalamus. And hypothalamus. So cerebrum, thalamus and hypothalamus are the parts of forebrain. Cerebrum, it is 2/3 of the total brain. Each cerebral hemisphere, so right and left cerebral hemisphere separated by longitudinal fissures. Each cerebral hemisphere contains 4 lobes: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe. Each cerebral hemisphere is in the form of 4 lobes. The peripheral part is grey in color due to presence of cytons. Axons are present inner part. You already know axon is covered by myelin sheath. Myelin sheath is white in color. So neuron. So like this. In the cytoplasm of the cell body, Nissel's granules are present. Nissel's granules are grey in color. The Nissel's granule present in the cyton giving grey appearance. That's why outer part of the brain grey matter, inner part white matter. Reverse in case of spinal cord. In the spinal cord, outer white matter, inner grey matter. To receive the information or transfer the information. So the peripheral part of brain is grey in color. Why? In a neuron. So brain is nothing but 100 billion neurons. So in the cyton, Nissel's granules are present. Nissel's granule are grey in color due to presence of cytons to the peripheral part. The peripheral part is grey in color. Got the name grey matter. The peripheral part also known as cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex contains several folds. These folds are known as gyri, singular gyrus. So, for example, it is the fold. What is the use of fold? If the fold become unfold, it increases the surface area. So, two types of cavities, grooves. Deep cavities known as fissures and shallow cavity known as sulci. Gyri and sulci increase the surface area of cerebrum, and the sulci responsible for intelligence, memory, thinking. More gyri and more sulci in men when compared to women. So the cerebrum is in the form of two lobes known as two cerebral. Each cerebral hemisphere is in the form of four lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital. The two cerebral hemispheres separated by longitudinal fissures. The folds present in the cerebral cortex known as gyri, singular gyrus. The grooves present in the gyri, shallow groove sulci, sulcus singular, and deep groove fissure. Fissure not useful. The deep groove never unfold. So gyri and sulci responsible for increasing the surface area. So gyri and sulci more in men. So the gyri and sulci responsible for intelligence, memory, thinking. The outer part, the peripheral grey part of the cerebral hemispheres or cerebrum known as cerebral cortex. 10 billion neurons present in the cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex further divisible into sensory area, motor area, associated area. Associated area not meant for neither sensory nor motor, memory and communication. Associated area responsible for memory and communication. The inner part of the cerebral hemisphere white in color due to presence of axon, myelinated axon. The medulla part of the two cerebral hemisphere connected by nerve tract. So what is nerve tract? Bundle of axons in the central nervous system known as nerve tract. This nerve tract is known as corpus callosum. So with the help of corpus callosum, the two cerebral hemispheres are connected. Now the left cerebral hemisphere control the activity of organ present in the right side. Right cerebral hemisphere control the activity of organ present in the left side. The inner part of cerebral hemisphere contain amygdala. Amygdala, hippocampal lobe. These two together known as limbic system. Inner surface of cerebral hemisphere, amygdala and hippocampal lobe. These two along with hypothalamus regulate the sexual behavior and emotional expression. Control the amygdala and hippocampal lobe, control the or regulate the sexual behavior, emotional expression. Limbic system, amygdala and hippocampal lobe. What is amygdala, hippocampal lobe? Inner part of cerebral hemisphere, amygdala and hippocampal lobe. Next one is thalamus. 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 So it is the thalamus. Thalamus responsible for signaling. So sensory and motor, coordinate the sensory and motor signaling. That is the function of thalamus. So it is the thalamus. Dorsal surface is known as epithalamus. Ventral is known as hypothalamus. Epithalamus. Ventral is known as hypothalamus. with pineal stalk, pineal body attaches to epithalamus. Pineal body attaches to epithalamus. Behind the pineal stalk, epithalamus and pyometer. Epithalamus and pyometer, these two together form the anterior choroid plexus. Anterior choroid plexus. Anterior choroid plexus produce and release cerebrospinal fluid. The cavity present in thalamus is known as diocele. The cavities present in cerebral hemispheres known as paraceles or first and second ventricles or lateral ventricles. Cavities of brain known as ventricle. First and second ventricles, paraceles. So the ventricle present in the right cerebral hemisphere is first ventricle. Left cerebral hemisphere is the second ventricle. The cavity present in the thalamus is known as diocele or third ventricle. The floor of the thalamus or the base of the thalamus, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus control all endocrine glands. That's why hypothalamus is known as the master control center. The sensory cells of hypothalamus produce and release two hormones, vasopressin and oxytocin. They released into posterior lobe of pituitary. So hypothalamus also control the autonomous nervous system, body temperature, regulate the body temperature, thirst, hunger, pain and satiety. Satiety means satisfaction. Satisfaction. With the help of infundibulum, a stalk, pituitary gland attaches to hypothalamus. Pituitary gland attaches to hypothalamus. Second part is thalamus. The roof of the thalamus, epithalamus. Base of the thalamus, hypothalamus. At the anterior part of epithalamus, with the help of pineal stalk, pineal body attaches to epithalamus. Pineal body is a endocrine gland. Behind the pineal stalk, it is the pineal stalk. With the help of pineal stalk, pineal body attaches to epithalamus. Behind the pineal stalk, the epithalamus along with pyometer. You already know pyometer is the inner meninge. Pyometer and the remaining part of epithalamus produce anterior choroid. So together known as anterior choroid plexus. So the anterior choroid plexus produce cerebrospinal fluid. The cavity present in thalamus is known as diocele or third ventricle. The base of the thalamus is known as hypothalamus. With the help of a stalk, pituitary gland attaches to hypothalamus. That stalk is known as infundibulum. Infundibulum. With the pineal stalk, pineal gland attaches to epithalamus. With infundibulum, pituitary gland attaches to hypothalamus. The hypothalamus regulates the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is the master endocrine gland. So hypothalamus regulates the pituitary gland. That means hypothalamus is the master control endocrine center. Master endocrine control center is hypothalamus. Hypothalamus regulates the body temperature, center for thirst, pain, hunger and satiety. Satiety means satisfaction. Satiety center. Satiety means satisfaction. The neurosensory cells of hypothalamus produce hormones, vasopressin and oxytocin, and release these hormones into posterior lobe of pituitary. Hypothalamus also control autonomous nervous system. So this is about forebrain. Forebrain contain two cerebral hemispheres, thalamus and hypothalamus. Two cerebral hemispheres together known as cerebrum. Cerebrum is 2/3 of the total brain. Contain 4 lobes: frontal, temporal, frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital lobes. The two cerebral hemispheres separated by longitudinal fissure. Outer part of the cerebrum grey in color. Cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex contain folds. These folds are known as gyri. So the deep grooves are known as fissures. Shallow groove cavity known as sulci. Gyri and sulci increase the surface area several times. Gyri and sulci more in men when compared to women. Gyri and sulci responsible for intelligence, memory, thinking. The inner surface of cerebral hemispheres contain lobes, amygdala and hippocampal lobe. These two together known as limbic system. Limbic system controls sexual behavior and emotional expression. So this is about forebrain. Forebrain contain cerebrum, thalamus and hypothalamus. Tomorrow we discuss midbrain, hindbrain, spinal cord.